Welcome to the show, the podcast that dives into the battles women fight on the front lines and within. I'm your host, Olivia Nunn. This series is proudly sponsored by Mill Mentor, the military's community's largest on-demand mentorship network built by veterans for veterans and their families. From job support to networking, find your mentor at millmentor.com. Now let's dive into today's episode where resilience, service, and strength take center stage. This is Women of War, and I'm here with Sue Fulton, who graduated from the very first class that women were allowed at West Point, the best branch of service, where she co-founded Knights Out and Outserve in the battle to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Sue, thank you so much for spending time with me on Women of War.
Olivia, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
You know, I've known you for like a while now. Like I met you back when I was working at West Point, which was, like 2010, 2011. So it's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. Sometimes it feels like 2010 was just yesterday, but
it does.
Sometimes, it's a really long time. That was my third year. I was appointed to the West Point Board of Visitors actually that was before, because I was appointed to the Board of Visitors in 2011, but I was obviously up at West Point quite often. And we did meet before that.
Yeah.
Can't remember what conference or Navy game, Army Navy game of some sort.
Army beat Navy.
Yeah.
So you have been in and around the military community. You've been an advocate, you've been a voice, you've been a leader. But before we get into all of that, let's start at the beginning. And there's something that I said in the beginning of your intro about you coming into the Army at a time where it was not only no, but hell no, we don't want women here. You were in the first class that women were legally authorized to be at the academies. Tell me, what was that like being the first class, because there weren't very many of you, to be allowed at that historic institution known as West Point?
Yeah, we started with 119 out of about 1,400 in our entering class, and then we graduated 62 out of, I think, 970 maybe total. So, we were a small percentage for sure. I say to a lot of people, you can do just about anything when you're 17 and don't know any better. I will say that, coming right out of high school, into and not being I didn't come from a military family, so I didn't have as much of a perspective or accurate expectation of what was going to happen when I got to West Point, as some of my classmates did. So it was quite a shock. And yeah, you're right. They had no interest in having us there. But by the same token, there was a level of professionalism. They actually selected the squad leaders who were going to have women, so that those who were like the most aggressively, angrily opposed to us were not assigned to, be our squad leaders. I mean, that didn't mean they couldn't make our lives miserable, but the squad leaders were chosen for a level of leadership that they could maintain an attitude of fairness. They could, for the most part, teach us the things that you need to teach a new cadet without too much rancor. So I mean, West Point as an organization, as academy, did the best they could, considering that less than a year before that, the superintendent had stood up in front of the Corps of Cadets, and this was Sidney Berry, stood up in front of the Corps of Cadets and said, women will be allowed at West Point over my dead body. So they had quite a 180 to pull before we were able to attend and be treated like human beings, or at least as much as would be allowed.
So a lot has changed. I was up at the academy there. I was assigned there as faculty from 2010 to 2013. And, so much has changed from the days of we don't want you here to now, it's very well integrated. I mean, there's still parts of the military where you could still feel that women don't belong. There are those that are always going to say that women shouldn't be here. And in fact, we're having this conversation in 2025 yet all over again. However, it is a far change from when you first entered. From the time that you graduated and in your time in the military, what was it like for you serving? What was your story like? I'm just curious because you have such a different lens, and especially in the advocacy work that you do.
Yeah. So I elected to go Signal Corps primarily because I wanted to be a platoon leader. I didn't want to go into a branch where I would be a staff officer. I also wasn't, at the time we could go field artillery or air defense artillery, but could only be assigned to missiles, long range artillery, not cannon artillery. So the women who went in those fields, I knew would be, again, trying to break new ground and not particularly welcome. And then there were branches where you were just as likely to be a staff officer as to have a platoon. And Signal Corps was one of those branches back then where you could be pretty sure to get a platoon in your first assignment. And I felt like that's what I was trained. That's what I trained for at West Point, was to lead troops. And that's what I wanted to do. So I went Signal Corps. And the other piece about the Signal Corps is that women had already served for quite a decent length of time in the Army Signal Corps. And so it wasn't this groundbreaking assignment. It wasn't I didn't have to, once again, stand for all women in the Army everywhere. I could just, do my job and prove myself. And I got, a great platoon sergeant out of the gate who had like 17 years of experience, E7, really, really smart guy, salt of the earth, crusty. And, the first day, I went out, went to have a cup of coffee with him. And I said, look, I know I don't know anything. I'm a second lieutenant, so I'm relying on you. And I said, I know, I don't know if you, we're expecting a female platoon leader. He's like, I don't care if you're a male or a female or black or white or green or red or polka dots or what. If you can listen and have some common sense, then I'll work with you. And we got along famously. And I think a lot of people, honestly, I think in that first assignment whether you're really meant for the Army. If you have a platoon, the good leaders learn to love their troops. Your soldiers will drive you crazy. They'll make you pull your hair out. They'll make your jaw drop at the crazy things they can do, but you love them. There's nothing you wouldn't do for those soldiers. And that was my experience. So I loved being in the Army. I was fortunate. Well, things worked out that I was selected for company command as a first lieutenant over two captains because of what I'd been able to prove to my battalion commander. So I had a decent sized company. We're actually authorized. It was in a new unit. So we were authorized 200 people, but we started with 60. And every day we got new people and new equipment. So it was managing chaos. And I loved that. So I loved my Army experience with, a great big red flashing asterisk, which is that when I was a staff officer, we got in a new battalion commander who had a real issue with what he would call queers. And in fact, his very first health and welfare inspection, he called the officers together on a Friday afternoon and said, we're going to do health and welfare on Sunday morning. And he wasn't interested in contraband, in drugs or weapons or any of that. He wanted to find who was sleeping in whose beds. He wanted to find gay men and lesbians and root them out. That was his focus. I mean, he didn't, and then health and welfare, and the health and welfare was going to be on, Sunday at 2 a.m, right? It's like the middle of the week and middle of the night. He didn't find any. I don't know, word might have leaked out, but it wasn't long before he came after me. And look, I was super closeted. I knew who the lesbians and some of the lesbians and gay soldiers were, but I kept myself very reserved. But one of my soldiers got in trouble, and when she had been Soldier of the Year, and it was some infraction. We went to the field, and she had signed for a vehicle, and she was several hours late returning the vehicle. And he reached out to me. He wanted to charge her for court-martial. He wanted to prefer court-martial charges for grand larceny, for stealing the vehicle. And I pushed back, and I was like, sir, she's a good soldier. That's really over the top, which it was. I mean, if you know anything about the Army, that was way over the top. Yeah. But she was notoriously gay, and he wanted to get her. And so when I pushed back, he decided the only reason I would defend this soldier is we must be having an affair. So he relieved me of duty, and I spent 3 months basically as a pariah of just going and sitting in an empty office every day. I had to show up to work, had to be in my uniform, but no one would talk to me except, CID would interrogate me. At the end of that time, they had zero evidence. They had to drop the charges, but I was tarred. I was, everybody in the unit knew that this investigation had happened. Fortunately,
as you're sharing this story, it dawns on me, because I was in a time in our military where you could be open, and your preferences mattered none to me. And in fact, for the most people that I served with, it didn't matter. Most of us, all we cared about is, are you at the right place at the right time in the right uniform doing the right thing? Right?
Yeah.
And in doing so, so I cannot imagine, Sue, what that life must have been like, that you couldn't be your true authentic self in uniform, doing what you love, serving this country that you love. Man, that's kind of heartbreaking.
Well, the thing is, Olivia, I served in that military too. I often talk about I served in 2 different armies before that commander got there. When I was a platoon leader and an XO, we had a battalion commander who, cared about getting the mission done. And I saw the reason I knew gay and lesbian soldiers is that everybody knew them, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. Even though it was officially, against regulations, you could be kicked out for it. But if you did your job, nobody cared. It's just if you got one of these commanders, who decided this was his mission in life, you were done for. So that's what made it so hard, is that I loved the Army when they weren't, when I didn't have this Captain Queeg or whatever you want to call him, who, decided, who really cared, who really felt like what mattered wasn't how you did your job, but who you were going home to. And I think we all understand now how crazy that was, but that's what I went through. And look, I got myself to a new unit where, like I said, I proved myself to the battalion commander. I got a company command, a successful company command. But always in the back of my mind, I knew, as much as my dream had been to go back to West Point and teach English, and I had a letter to do that, but I never wanted to go through that horror again. I never wanted to have that feeling that everything I've worked for is going to be destroyed because I'm gay. And I wasn't going to go through it again. And that was one of the worst times of my life, partly because I was so young and the stakes seemed so high. It really seemed like my life could end, but it was really, really traumatizing in ways that West Point wasn't traumatizing. But it was definitely the seed for the work that I did later. And I'm so grateful that God gave me the opportunity to come back around, to be able, in a way, I talk about it sometimes as redeem myself, because there was a moment in that investigation where I sat across the desk from a CID investigator who looked at me and said, "Are you a homosexual?" And I said no. I lied. I violated my own values, my own, code, not to mention the Army Code and the West Point Code. And I violated that. And I felt guilty about it for years. But by working so that nobody else would have to be in that position, I was working to redeem myself for having told that lie.
Yeah. And to me, I love the work that you've done and you continue to do. And just, I'm in awe of the sheer strength that you have shown our community and for yourself to put yourself through that, and for everyone else that has been able to follow through the work that you've done. So thank you, Sue, for all that you've done for those that get to enjoy the fruit of your hard-earned labor that you've put towards that. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much.
So you've had a successful, although, people said that you shouldn't be there at West Point, and you had some time in the military, and then you went on, and like you talked about, it laid the groundwork for advocacy. But it wasn't just advocacy. You've really done so much work in our community. You've done work during the Obama administration. We talked about your time at West Point. But you just remain so active. In fact, so active that I'm just like, does this woman ever sleep or take a vacation? Because I swear everywhere I look, I'm like, there's Sue again, just keeping busy. So talk to me about, after your time and after you hung up your boots, what was that for you? What was that chapter in your life, and where did you want to go?
So I had a whole career after the Army in brand management, where I worked at Procter & Gamble and Arm & Hammer, Shearing Plow, Merck and Pfizer, on the consumer, working to market consumer packaged goods, and honing my skills in messaging, in communications, and I'm proud to say helping to bring some prescription drugs over the counter to expand access to people who didn't have, maybe didn't have good health care. So expanding access to important drugs for people. But all that time, I also maintained my connections. I was mentoring cadets and junior officers. Invariably, I met many gay and lesbian service members. If I went up to West Point for a conference or a game, like I was joking earlier, I went to West Point a lot, or a retreat. I was still very connected with the Catholic community. Some cadet would say, "Hey, ma'am, could we sit down for a cup of coffee?" And I'd know, they're gay. It's like 100% of the time. And, because I was a civilian, I was safe. And it was like on the grapevine that Sue's gay and you can trust her. And, helped counsel cadets through difficult choices and a difficult time. And, many of them went on to have great Army careers. And, also I got to know a lot of just cadets in general. So that connection, really bore fruit in 2009 when Becky Canis, 91, reached out to me and said, she was one of those cadets way back when we went on a tech retreat, and she said, hey, can we go for a walk and have a chat? Anyway, she's like, then however many years later in 2009, 2009, she's like, we're going to start Nights Out, the LGBT alumni group, West Point alumni group. And, I want you to be on the board. And it was a really tough time because my wife, Penny, had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I said, I can't do a lot, but she's like, I just want, you don't even need to take a role, just be an at-large member and just, give me some advice. And, thankfully, Penny came through treatment like a champ. So that ended up being not as bad as we had feared. But meanwhile, we found ourselves in the middle of the whole Don't Ask, Don't Tell battle as this little Nights Out organization because West Point carries such weight in the community. And when Lieutenant Dan Choi came out and the Army went after him and publicly kicked him out, it got a huge amount of media attention. And in fact, there had been, some of the big LGBT groups had already decided they were going to backburner Don't Ask, Don't Tell till the second Obama term. But here we were making all these headlines with this lieutenant and then the 2009 March on Washington. And Don't Ask, Don't Tell ended up moving ahead of almost everything, including marriage equality, because it was driven by veterans and then later service members. OutServe, the other organization I helped found with an Air Force lieutenant and some other folks who were active duty, was all active duty. I was like the veteran face of, so I could sign documents because everybody else had to be closeted, had to be anonymous and invisible. So, but we were able to play a part in the Pentagon's review of the policy. And ultimately, we had an opportunity, the fall of 2010, we got an outreach from the from the White House. And the Brian Bond from the Office of Public Engagement said, we have worked it out. They have an opportunity to send 4 active duty gay or lesbian service members to meet with Valerie Jarrett in the White House. And on the side, he said, look, the ideal here is that they tell their story and that you want her to be so impressed, so moved, so motivated. She gets up and walks into the Oval Office and tells the president, we have to do this. And so we sent a Navy commander, a Marine sergeant. A Navy commander was a young black man who was a medical officer who was headed to seminary. A young Latino Marine, Air Force Lieutenant Josh Seafried, who was the founder of OutServe. And I reached out. I said, I think we should have at least one woman, and I know the right woman for this. Army, Casey Mose, who at the time was a major at West Point teaching respect and ethics. She was a combat veteran of Iraq and had commanded an MP company that saw a tremendous amount of action in Iraq. And we sent those 4 up to the White House. And I have since heard Valerie Jarrett speak twice publicly after Obama left the White House. And both of those times that she spoke, she talked about Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And she talked about the West Point graduate Army officer who taught ethics at West Point and had to lie about being gay. Casey Mose had such an impact on her that she told the president, yes, we need to do this. I love telling that story because it's a story about West Point women. It's a story about what we, each of us as West Point graduates, but as veterans, each of us as veterans, each of us who have been in this great service, have a story to tell, and that story can change the world.
100%. Let's take a pause here, get a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, I want to talk about how that changed for you. Mil Mentor is the military community's largest on-demand mentorship network built by veterans. You pick your own mentor and as many as you like from over 1,000. Whether you're a military spouse looking for resume help, a veteran building his or her network, or looking to target a company for your next job, or soon to be transitioning and planning to start your own business. There are recruiters, executives, and professionals across fields waiting to help you. Sign up as a mentor or a mentee at milmentor.com. So you just got done talking about how stories can change people's lives, how they could touch people's lives, and how people from hearing stories can see themselves, which is why I love doing what I do as a podcaster, why I believe storytelling is so important. And with that being said, on the backside of this, when the laws change, it created a personal change for you. You were able to have your own wedding at the historic chapel at West Point. And because I actually was able to work at West Point, I've seen that chapel. I've actually been to weddings there too. It is beautiful. So talk to me about that. I mean, I'm sure that must have been a full circle moment for you to have your own wedding at that beautiful chapel.
So there's a backstory here too, which is Penelope Darren Neeson, born and raised in New Jersey, actually Long Branch, so she's a shore girl. If you're from Jersey, you know. Who went to Rutgers, played rugby at Rutgers, by the way, worked at AT&T. Like in her summers, she when she was young, she worked at Asbury Park, on the arcade. Yeah, she just like full on Jersey girl. So we met in 95. We had a commitment ceremony in 1999. And when Jersey passed domestic partnership, we registered. When Jersey passed civil unions, we had a small wedding with just 3 of our best friends. But we were waiting for Jersey to pass marriage. And we heard, so while we were waiting, New York passed marriage equality. And I was on the board of visitors at this time, and I heard from a young lieutenant who worked at Keller Army Hospital, and she wanted to marry her partner, and she was getting a lot of static from the chaplain's office, because in order to get married on West Point, you've got to go through the West Point chaplain's office. And so I reached out. First I talked to her, and they said, well, they have nobody in their office whose denomination will allow them to do a same-sex wedding. And I'm like, well, that doesn't mean they can't allow you to have it. I said, I can get somebody. In fact, I know a minister over the mountain, a Unitarian minister, who is also a reserve chaplain who will happily marry you. So I connected them with him. He agreed to do it. And I said, if you have any more trouble, let me know. And so she was they were working on making that happen. Meanwhile, we were visiting DC, actually hanging out with a couple of our friends who worked on Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal at Chenet, which is a bar in Arlington that all the military folks know. Mm-hmm. And I was telling this story, and my friend Jenny Caruso, who incidentally taught PE at West Point, but she said, well, why don't you and Penny get married at West Point? And I we're waiting for Jersey. But then I thought about it. I was like, holy cow, we could maybe do that. And so I said, Penny, and she was talking to somebody else. I said, well, do we need to wait for New Jersey, or what would you think about getting married at West Point? She says, oh, that would be cool. I said, So I got down on one knee and I asked her, And everybody died. I took off my wedding ring, and asked her if she would marry me, and put my ring on her finger, And so that's how we decided to get married. But then I called the lieutenant and I said, look, if you do this, you're going to get a lot of press. If that's okay, terrific. I'll walk you through it. I'll help you out with it. If you don't want to be the first, let me know. We'll move our date up. And she said, no, we're okay. We'll be the first. And we're going to do it at the post chapel. I was like, oh, okay. So I called and I called the chaplain's office and I said, I'd like to get married at West Point. Great. Are you a graduate? I am. Class of 1980. What's your name? Brenda C. Fulton. Great. What's the groom's name? I said, Penelope. She said, Penelope, as in, I said, yes, a woman. She's like, hold, please. So she gets the head chaplain on the phone and he's like, who am I speaking? And I said, Brenda Fulton. I'm a member of the West Point Board of Visitors, so I'm not sure if we've met or not. So I'm like laying it on, right? Because I also want to smooth the tracks for this young couple. And I said, he says, well, unfortunately, we don't have a chaplain that can perform those ceremonies because our denominations don't allow. So I'm sorry, you would need that for a sponsor. I said, well, actually, I have a retired colonel, Episcopalian colonel, who is willing to come and officiate. So I don't need one of you to do that. And aren't you authorized as the head chaplain? Aren't you authorized to sponsor, even though you're not? He says, well, technically, yes. I said, oh, that's great. So we smoothed our path and were able to smooth their path as well. So they got married at the Old Post Chapel a week before we did, but then we ended up being the first same-sex couple to get married at the Cadet Chapel, which of course is the massive big chapel that's in all the postcards and everything. It was one of the best days of my life. We had several hundred people there. My friend Gautam, who I met him when he was working at the White House on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He took a photo that has been my annual photo every year of us walking down the aisle and the light streaming in through the stained glass windows. I can send it to you if you want to use it. It just was such a day of joy. We had, we had a former congressman, we had flag officers, we had cadets. We had an arch, a saber arch that was all LGBT cadets except for one ally, just so that we would have all the letters covered. We had gay, lesbian, bi, trans, and ally in the saber arch. We had our reception at the Hotel Thayer. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And yes, was it a full circle? Absolutely. It was just such a blessed time. And I still, I have people come up to me who were there, who had that same experience. And it was just amazing.
I love that for you guys. And I love that story. And I love the fact that the hard work that you put in, the advocacy, all of that ended in such a beautiful, positive note for you personally. And because of that, there's so many that get to come behind your footsteps. And I'm really hoping that today in 2025, that story remains true, especially with all the craziness that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. I subsequently stood up Sparta, which is an organization of transgender service members. And there were thousands of people working to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Lifting the trans ban, I mean, there weren't many organizations who were really working hard on that because, there was a lot of money donated to live Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but the money dried up after that. Money went to marriage equality. We won marriage equality. The money dried up. So it was the hard work of transgender veterans and service members and a few allies like me and other folks who had worked on Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and believed in supporting, supporting our trans brothers and sisters, siblings. So we got the trans ban lifted, and with, a hiccup in 2017, basically there was almost 10 years where trans people served openly and left a record of incredible, honorable service. We're talking, pilots at the top of their game. We're talking infantry, airborne rangers. We're talking cyber experts, airframe experts, medical doctors and other personnel. I can name just about every field. I can name someone who served. One of the top Navy, top supply officers in the entire Navy, who had won, a Navy-wide award and was fast tracking to a senior rank. These are trans people with multiple overseas deployments that put to bed all of the myths about readiness and deployability that people had believed before about trans service members. And so with all this record of honorable service, they've just been unceremoniously purged from the military based on zero evidence of lack of capability. Trans people have shown that they have the competence, the character, and the commitment to serve. And they've served honorably, but they've just been purged from the military. And there are other troubling things that are going on right now. The secretary has been told that he's been told by several different people, and I have reliable reports from some of our combat arms headquarters and other places, that the secretary has been told women have met every standard. They have met exactly the same standard as men to earn their Ranger tab. They've met exactly the same standard as men to be infantry officers, to be armor officers. And they deserve that. In many cases, more than some men, right? They're at the top of leadership in these branches, particularly armor. And his response is, well, I don't believe that. I don't agree with you.
Of course.
As if it's a matter of opinion and not a matter of proven performance. His feeling is, I don't believe women belong. And if you believe they do, well, that's a difference of opinion, and my opinion's more important. No, this is a matter of standards. This is a matter of performance. So what we see them doing, and this has been going on since the 70s, is an obsession that to be in combat arms, that you have to, it's all about physical fitness. So the obsession with physical fitness started in the 70s because women were threatening to get into the jobs that men had held exclusively. When my first two companies, my first company commander was morbidly obese. Nobody cared because he was a good signal officer and good at his job. My second company commander was a chain smoker who could barely hack his way through 2 miles before, collapsing. But nobody cared because he was a good signal officer and he was good at his job. This obsession with push-ups and pull-ups is 100% about keeping women out of positions that men have owned previously. And so you'll see that the fitness requirements continue to dramatically get harder and harder and harder over the years. But what about other performance requirements? What about other training requirements? What about ASVAB scores? What about intelligence and problem solving? One of the things that combat arms have learned is that, when you compare a 22-year-old woman to a 22-year-old man, their leadership ability, their maturity, and in fact, their problem solving is far better. But that's not measured quantitatively in a way that you can count pull-ups.
Right.
And so it's still easier to keep women out, to try to force women out of those positions, even though women continue to step up and show, You're going to raise the standard. All right, let's meet it. And they do. So I'm deeply worried that there's a political ideology that's being imposed on the military, a political ideology that says that women and Black people are presumed inferior, and trans and gay people don't have a right to exist. So when you impose that political ideology, you have to find ways to implement it. I mean, one way is you just fire senior people who don't agree with that political ideology. Another way is you privilege things like the ability to do pull-ups over, say, the ability to, walk a balance beam, flexibility or balance, or those things that women excel at. You don't take intelligence and leadership into account. You kill programs like the Battalion Commanders Assessment Program, which provided a level playing field to assess leaders before they take battalion command. And that program was proven successful at identifying and eliminating toxic leaders. That program was killed. So they've changed the standards so that if you have misconduct on your record, that will no longer prevent you from taking command or getting promoted. So they're saying, well, we don't want to lower standards. They're lowering standards on everything except physical fitness. And the problem is that our pacing threat, China, we're not going to beat them in a gladiators arena where we are doing pull-ups next to each other. We're going to beat them with logistics. We're going to beat them with cyber. We're going to beat them with creative problem solving and the ability to stay flexible and stay ahead of what's happening in the field and on the sea. And so this is my concern, is that this political ideology is going to weaken our military to the point where we are vulnerable to our largest adversaries in the world.
Yeah, right. We know that women are force multipliers, and we
Yes.
are part of the warfighter, have been since the beginning, since the founding of our nation. That hasn't changed, whether we were there legally or not, and we will continue to be there. And it is a disservice to wipe away the history, the stories, the sacrifice, the trailblazing paths that so many before us and those that will continue to come after us will continue to do to change the landscape. And let's just be honest. Men like to take a lot of credit, but when you really peel back the stories and when you actually go digging into history, even though that, you got a lot of 404 not found, a lot of the capabilities, let's just be honest, women were the one that created it, problem solved, and were the true architects. So we talk about how it's great to be a parachutist, a jumper, but that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this tiny little woman who had the guts to jump out of the plane and prove that a parachute could work. Or the signal, Wi-Fi. I mean, that was a woman. And I could just go on and on and on, but we're just gonna skip over that and just say, men are the greatest. And this isn't about bashing men. The true part is that we together, men and women, make a great team. And that's the conversation we need to have instead of removing women from this conversation.
Admiral Grace Hopper was instrumental in creating the first computer and help and creating COBOL. I mean, you're right. Women have been part of some of the most important initiatives in military history. So yeah, we're 100% on the same page. I think that the pendulum will swing back. I think that you can't be blind to what's already been done. You can't say women can't command when there are so many examples of women having already successfully command. You can't say women can't serve in combat when there are so many examples of women serving heroically and successfully in combat. You can't say trans people don't belong in the military when they served openly for almost 10 years and many years before that heroically and successfully. So, there's only so much effort you can put in ignoring truth and ignoring facts before you have to acknowledge that the strength of our military does in fact lie in a diverse force.
Yep, 100%. Sue, I could spend hours talking with you. I mean, we have just such the same passion in some of the conversations that we have. And just, you are just such a wealth of knowledge. I love the fact that you have blazed a trail for so many to follow behind you, the passion, the energy that you have, not only for what you believe in, but in the community that we serve. Thank you for everything that you do, everything that you continue to do. And thank you for spending time with me today. Is there anything that you would love to leave my listeners with?
Well, first, Olivia, I want to thank you for doing this. Telling our stories is the most important thing we can do. And I'm so grateful to you. You have worked hard to support our military women, all of our military service members. And I'm just so appreciative of you because you're also really good at it.
Thank you.
The other thing I'll say to people, when you're in tough times, think of the people who've come before us. Our military heroes don't just include, John Basilone and I think of Jack Jacobs, Medal of Honor recipient, but also include Medgar Evers and Harvey Milk. They were veterans too. People who have fought for this more perfect union. And just remember the people whose footsteps we walk in. And hopefully that will make our burden a little bit lighter. I know it does for me. It makes my burden lighter. And then I can look down at my feet and say, okay, what is the next step? What is just the one next thing I need to do? And that too makes the path easier. So I would wish that on all your listeners. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Women of War, proudly sponsored by MilMentor, where the military community finds its mentors. Until next time, keep showing up, speaking out, and standing strong.